Hello, I'm Bob the Booker and welcome back to my channel. Now, in something that's a slight departure from what I normally do, today I'm going to be trying to combine two somewhat niche interests, and I'm going to be finding the books that I think best fit the cast of RuPaul's Drag Race UK Season 2. Now, before I begin, there is absolutely no shade intended towards any of the queens, nor towards any of the books involved. I'm going to try and keep this as nice as possible. You may be able to tell all the way through that I have some favourites, but we'll see how those go as it goes along. Now, in trying to put together which queens I think go with which books, I've looked at a couple of things. Partly a little bit about where they're from. You know, if they're really rooted in a regional identity, I've tried keeping that as much as possible. But also, I really wanted to match some of the personality of these queens with these books. So that might not be a direct like-for-like comparison, but it might be the sort of feel I get from a queen or the way they describe themselves. Or it could even be a little bit about one of the characters in one of the books, or kind of a general sort of feeling. This is a bit experimental, but we shall see how this goes. And I should mention at the beginning, this entire video is sponsored by my English degree, which is now crying quietly in a corner as I try and justify the large amount of money that I'm essentially paid, or I'm still paying back for said degree. So here goes nothing. So first up alphabetically, we have Ahora. Now, Ahora speaks a lot about being really driven, really hungry, really kind of so ambitious about what she wants to do. She sees herself as a kind of muse. She's going to go out and get what she wants. Now, automatically, that suggests lots and lots of characters to me, but none of them really kind of felt right. None of them were really sitting right until I kind of thought about maybe a character that at first doesn't sound like the nicest comparison, but I think is quite a fun one. Now, at first, saying that she is a character from Pride and Prejudice really seems like I'm taking this idea of this video a bit far, and it's a bit stretched and far-fetched right from the beginning, and you're probably right. But the character I think she might be from Pride and Prejudice is Lydia Bennett. Now, hear me out. My whole thing with this is Lydia comes across maybe as a bit silly and a bit kind of has a bit of a disregard for the rules at first, but ultimately goes out and does what she wants, even though it upsets others. Now, we saw from this first episode, there's a little bit of animosity around Ahora as she walks in. Some of the queens seem to have a bit of a history with her, and that's kind of something that stuck in my mind, and that for me is what makes her Lydia. Lydia has this whole sort of fantasy in her mind that she's going to go out and get what she wants, and she does, and she annoys a lot of people in doing so. But ultimately, there's a lot to be said about her character. She's got such strength of force and of passion behind her, and she goes out and does it. She just achieves what it is that she wants to do, and for me that feels very Ahora, right? Maybe again I'll be proved wrong as the show goes on, but that's kind of something that's stuck in my mind right from the beginning, and I kind of want to see if I'm right. We're going to come to Pride and Prejudice again a little bit later with one of the other queens from this show, but I kind of like characters like that, the kind of sort of subtle background characters, again nothing on Ahora here, but who have this really interesting drive and kind of upset the apple cart in some ways, and that's very much what Lydia does in the story, and would not be surprised if Ahora throws a few curveballs in Drag Race UK. So let's see if I'm right on that. Next up, we have Astina. And now Astina comes in and she talks a lot about how she's the girl next door. We see her first runway is very, very girl next door, very East London. People, you feel like you kind of know that girl. It's great. I really like it. I would possibly pair her with another book that is very, very girl next door for me. Very relatable, very human, but also kind of very funny, arch, clever. And that is Queenie by Candice Carty-Williams. For me, I think there's a really fun pairing here. Different parts of London, yes, but I think Astina embodies so much of that joy that Queenie also has, of being a character who you're really rooting for. You know that she's kind of working through it. You kind of see her kind of challenging up, you know, with her flaws, but that's what makes her so relatable and so fun. So I would say Queenie for her. Next up, we have Bimini Bon Boulash. Now, this again is a queen I found really hard to place within all of this. My first thought was to go for The Vegetarian by Han Kang for obvious reasons, given that her opening line was "I'm vegan." Also, side point, I'm not really sure if it's like the most unique thing about yourself if you are literally an East London queen to say like, "Hey, I'm vegan." It's like, I'm fairly sure if you're going to be vegan anywhere in London, especially East London's probably the place for it. I'm vegan myself. Anyway, that aside, I kind of thought that, The Vegetarian doesn't really kind of quite sum it up in the same way. I think Bimini's whole thing is that she's this kind of edgy, kind of rough around the edges in a really good way, alternative kind of queen. And so for me, I struggled with this, and particularly with the kind of political nature perhaps of her as a queen as well. And I kind of want to say the main character from Breakfast on Pluto. Now, I think the character in Breakfast on Pluto is a little bit softer and a bit more ethereal and a little bit more kind of in her own world. But for me, what kind of where these two characters kind of come into being perhaps similar is that really strong sense of point of view, of focus, of being really quite silly, brilliant, clever, kind of creative queens. And all of this kind of in a backdrop of something a bit more edgy and rough and kind of strange. In Breakfast on Pluto, it's kind of with a backdrop of tensions around Ireland, and I kind of think I kind of see this sort of roughness, this kind of rough and ready, interesting kind of quirkiness to Bimini as well. I kind of hope we see a bit more of that. I hope we see this really clever point of view keep coming out week on week, because I think she's got some really interesting tricks up her sleeve. And yeah, let's hope this comparison makes sense later down the line when we get to the end of the season. Maybe it won't, who knows. Next up is Cherry Valentine. Now, I found this quite a difficult one. So Cherry Valentine, for me, the kind of feeling I'm getting is at the moment, quite new and quite timid and quite shy. And she's suddenly been thrown into this kind of shark tank of Drag Race. And she's really trying to, show that she is kind of talented and strong, and she's got the kind of chops to go far. And for me, that kind of reminds me a little bit of the two main characters from A Series of Unfortunate Events. Now, not casting any shade on her drag with the whole unfortunate events thing, that's not what I'm saying at all. But for me, they are two, young children who are thrust into the middle of this kind of bizarre world that they have to make their way through, with all of these really big characters who are louder than them, who are cruel and twisted. Again, not saying anything about the other queens. And she's kind of they've got to work it out and make the best of it. And for me, that's kind of what I see as being Cherry in this sort of stage of the competition. She's really kind of trying to find her way and to kind of boost herself up. Hopefully she'll have that kind of narrative arc where she's kind of able to save the day and kind of do the things that she needs to. But that's kind of where I see, like, she's kind of got these things that she's not entirely sure about, and she's trying to make it all work. So next we come to Elly Diamond. Now, at first I was really struggling with thinking about a book for her, but then I kept on having this sort of same thought coming back through my head, and I thought, hang on, let's rewatch her Meet the Queens. And then it struck me, it's Nancy from Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. Now, again, really hear me out on this one. So her whole thing in Oliver Twist, and more probably the musical in some ways than the book, but she's sort of portrayed as the sort of tart with a heart. And the whole idea is, because she's this really powerful, caring figure, but who is kind of sometimes overlooked. In Elly's Meet the Queens, she speaks a lot about how she's really full of like fire and passion, and she's a bit of a kind of cartoon character, but ultimately, she's really caring. She really kind of wants to look after people, and she's just there for a really good time. And that was it. That was what I was really struggling with. So I think she has a little element of Nancy to her. Again, no kind of shade on her or on the character, but for me, part of what I think makes that work is this kind of warmth and kind of joy that radiates through her, and that's exactly what I found when I saw her kind of on the main stage and in her confessionals. Every time she's speaking, there's this kind of joy to her, and I think, you know, although some of the other queens also share that kind of sort of somewhat powerful presence with being kind of careful and caring and powerful, I kind of see, yeah, Elly maybe fitting that. And also part of what makes me think that is she's also been kind of maybe overlooked so far, you know, in lieu of some of the other bigger protagonists like Oliver Twist. And so I kind of think she's a bit of a dark horse and might be really interesting in this competition. And kind of part of me thinks that that's the sort of redemption arc for Nancy in my mind. And that makes entire sense to me and probably to nobody else. But I'm going to go with it. So there we go. Nancy and Elly, you are one and the same in my mind now. Next we come to Ginny Lemon, who is just such a wonderfully bizarre force of nature. And quite frankly, I have found placing Ginny with any book probably the most difficult. Not for any lack on Ginny's part, just because she's such a she's so out there. She's kind of Sue Pollard on acid. She's kind of Verka Serdushka. She's kind of a bit of everything. But in terms of books, the closest fit I could find, and this is by no means a perfect fit, but the closest fit I could find is Quentin Crisp from The Naked Civil Servant. Now, a large part of this is just focusing on the sense of humour. Quentin Crisp is very cutting, very quick. He's got a lot of very clever one-liners, and he is also just a complete outcast and figure of such interest, you know, in and around everybody else. Really crafty, really clever, really savvy. And I kind of see that for Ginny. Again, not a perfect match, but I think that is the closest I can probably do with someone as kind of otherworldly as Ginny. A sort of backup option I had for Ginny was also James St. James with Party Monster. My thinking behind it being that Ginny is just such a weird creative force in the same way that many of the club kids were. And James St. James's Party Monster is so full of these weird and wonderful turns. I don't think Ginny is exactly the same, and definitely if Ginny were in a book, it would hopefully involve a bit less murder. But that's kind of where I see her kind of being on that kind of giant scale of literature that exists. So next up, one of my absolute favourite queens from this season, Jo Black, who I've been following online for a little while now, and I'm just kind of blown away, really, exactly my kind of queen. And for me, what I love so much about Jo Black is that kind of arch, wry, clever sense of humour mixed with street smarts, mixed with kind of old glam, and this really kind of clever, spooky sensibility. And for me, I can think of no two writers who I could compare her to other than Oscar Wilde and Terry Pratchett. And I think Jo Black is the kind of natural love child of the two of them. Now, my reasoning behind this, take a play like A Woman of No Importance by Oscar Wilde, full of these very clever repartees and biting bits of humour, very kind of wry and sarcastic and clever and sort of sardonic, and mix that with the kind of street smart, jokey, everyday kind of man of a lot of the characters in Terry Pratchett novels. And I think you've got Jo Black. For me, that is one of the highest compliments I can pay to somebody, honestly, to kind of bring them as a kind of love child of those two writers. And that's exactly how I would say Jo Black is in this contest. Now, one of our two Scottish queens this season is Lawrence Chaney. And this was a queen, actually, I found quite difficult to pin down at first. And I didn't want to just go for too obvious a route of just a Scottish novel. But actually, the more I thought about it, the more I thought of a Scottish novel that makes a lot of sense. And again, bear with me on this very tenuous journey to explaining this. So Lawrence Chaney, very, very quick on her feet. Always looking out for the joke, always very sharp, always observing other people. I really want her to be one of the characters from Shuggie Bain. Now, not one of the main characters in this somewhat bleak at times book, but ultimately very, very heartwarming. book. I kind of see her as being one of the women on one of the estates, because we get these little insights quite early into Shuggie Bain, of kind of working class Glasgow, and she's not from Glasgow, but play with me on this one. And or maybe she is she from Glasgow? I think she might be. But either way, Lawrence Chaney is so quick on her feet, and I totally see her as being one of those women from the kind of in the working class areas of Glasgow who is just sharp. Nobody is taking her for a ride. Nobody's going to get the best of her, and she's always going to get the last word. And for me, I think that's such a fun and exciting thing in a queen. I would absolutely pay to see a show when we can go back out and do things like that again, but I'd absolutely pay to see a show and just watch her on the mic for 2 hours. I don't care if she does nothing else. I just want to see her having these back and forth moments with the audience. She's so brilliant and so sharp, and that's exactly what I'd go with her. Next, we come to Sister Sister from Liverpool. Now, I did bear in mind the Liverpool connection with this one, but I was also trying to find a writer, or at least a set of characters, who have that kind of mixture of being quite fierce and quite independent and strong, maybe a little bit unsure of themselves at times, as we sort of saw in the first episode, but that there's a real cleverness there, a real uniqueness, and a real kind of strength of voice and of kind of point of view. And for me, a Liverpudlian author who makes a lot of sense in this regard for me is Beryl Bainbridge. You wouldn't necessarily automatically think of her as having these, oh, there's my cat, hello, doing a little runway show for us all. But you wouldn't necessarily at first think of Beryl Bainbridge and drag queens maybe in the same sentence, but I think that Sister Sister might represent a character from either the Dressmaker or the Bottle Factory outing, and if not from those two, maybe from An Awfully Big Adventure. Now, the reason for all three of those is that, again, is that really strong sense of voice. There's a real like rugged, salt of the earth kind of thing that comes through from them, but as well as that, they've all got this kind of wry sense of humor, very clever, very witty, very strong and ready and independent. And I kind of see that for Sister Sister. Again, obviously we've not seen her perform that much yet, but I like to think that she's got these kind of secret weapons ready to kind of destroy some of these challenges. And kind of like a few of the characters in Beryl Bainbridge novels, they're all very warm and empathetic and flawed and brilliant and funny. And I kind of want to see that. I am, in my mind, this makes complete sense. This makes total sense with my French vanilla fantasy of all of this. But for me, that is kind of where I think Sister Sister would be. Maybe. Let's see. Next up is a queen who I already adore so much this season, and I have a lot of faith in their ability to make it right to the end, and that's Tace. And part of what I love about Tace so much is there's this real warmth and joy and humour, but also she's strong, she's fierce, she's powerful. And this, again, is a very weird comparison, perhaps. I see her as kind of being Momo from the book of the same name by Michael Ender. And my reasoning is this. In the book, Momo essentially leads a campaign to take everyone with her to kind of battle these impending forces. And I can kind of think of nobody who I would rather have as a kind of leader through tough times from this cast than someone like Tace. She's so warm and funny and powerful, and you just get the sense that she could own a room, walk in and just absolutely boss it. And for me, that is kind of the Momo vibes I'm getting. Momo is one of my favorite books. She's maybe a little bit different in character to Momo herself, who is sometimes quite quiet and is much more focused on kind of this idea of listening to stories and of kind of making people heard. But I kind of get that feeling from Tace. I kind of feel like she would be the one in your local drag scene who would kind of make sure everyone's got everything they need, should be bringing everyone together, should be like, right, you're on in 5 minutes, have you got everything you need? I kind of get that vibe from her. Again, a bit of a weird one. I'm not sure if it always necessarily works, but someone like Tace, I just see as being this really powerful, strong character. And a kind of a quiet power. I mean, although she's you know, she's been quite talkative and quite loud in some of her bits so far, I just kind of think there's so much character there. There's so much brilliance, and I'm really excited to see what comes next from her. Tia Coffey is another queen who I just think is so interesting. There's obviously been this whole setup around her being a London queen, particularly a South London queen, and I feel almost bad that the book I want to compare her to is a North London thing, you know, and that might not necessarily exactly fit, but Tia Coffey's little moment at the beginning where she talks about her name and about the Kofi part coming from Kofi Annan is just hilarious and just absolute genius. And on that kind of note, I see her as kind of being a sort of a character in a Zadie Smith novel. Now, my thinking on this is a little bit abstract, but I'll try and go with it. A lot of characters in Zadie Smith novels are these really clever, astute observers of everyone around them, who kind of sit back a little bit, make these kind of fun little quips and jokes, and kind of they have the last laugh. And I kind of see that a little bit with Tia. I think she would kind of be a queen, hopefully, who could kind of assess the situation that's going on, and make little kind of barbed comments here and there, in a way that very much feels like she's kind of staring over the rims of her spectacles, kind of whilst drinking something, either tea, coffee, or well, tea or coffee, or something like an alcoholic drink. I kind of see her kind of pausing, taking the straw away from her mouth, making a quick comment, and then going back to gin and tonic, or maybe a, you know, tea and coffee, whatever. I think she's really fun, and it's also nice, you know, I'm a South Londoner myself, and it's always fun to see queens who you're kind of like, I get her, like she's, yeah. I totally get her, and I'm really excited to see what comes next from her. Maybe if I had to pick a Zadie Smith novel, I've not read that many, I would maybe say a character from On Beauty. There are loads of kind of barbed, quick, clever comments between characters in that book, and I would maybe say one of the characters from there, maybe Kiki, but it remains to be seen in the rest of the season. The final queen alphabetically then is Veronica Green, an incredibly charming and dynamic and interesting and clever queen, who is northern. All of this started to point me towards, this seems a bit out on a limb here, but go with me. I kind of see her as being an Elizabeth Bennet character from Pride and Prejudice. My reasoning being that she's quite plucky, she's quite fierce, but at the same time has this, you know, can be very sweet, can be very nice when needed to. She knows the right kind of things to do. There's that really charming, cheeky kind of smile that we see during the confessionals. And I see her as being quite a fun firebrand kind of character. Like, it's maybe not coming out right now in these first bits, but I kind of see how maybe throughout the season we might see a little bit more of that spark and that fire. I also kind of, you know, a lot of Jane Austen heroines, you know, there is that kind of pluck and that kind of character behind them. But I kind of wanted her to be, yeah, someone a bit fiery, someone like Elizabeth Bennet, who is willing to kind of break the rules, but can very much follow them if needs be, can look beautiful and delicate and dainty, as we saw with that gorgeous look in the first episode, but maybe has that little bit of fire under her that we are not quite seeing just yet, but she's going to bring it out, I'm fairly sure. Fast forward to the end of the season when I'm going to be entirely wrong about all of these queens, but let's see how that goes for now. So yeah, that's kind of where I see Veronica Green being. And so they are all of the queens from RuPaul's Drag Race UK season 2. The more I'm thinking about some of these pairings make a lot of sense to me. Some of them, the more the season goes on, probably will make a lot less sense, but let's see how it all goes. Either way, I'm excited to hear some of your opinions on who some of these queens might be best matched with, either in terms of characters or books themselves, or even writers. Again, obviously, all of this is all in fun. This is all very silly and just my opinion on things. This is not any kind of shade thrown any way towards any of these queens. I am really excited by this cast. I actually find Drag Race UK weirdly makes me patriotic, in the sense that you suddenly realize just how ridiculous and camp and messy and silly the UK is and just constantly wondering what on earth is going on. But I'm really excited to see this set of queens really thrive. I'm really excited to see what they bring each time. And again, yeah, I'd love to hear some of your opinions on what books or what characters they would best suit. Again, this has been very silly and fun, but I hope you enjoyed it. I've been Bob the Booker. Thank you all very, very much, and enjoy season 2. Bye-bye. Take care.